Professor Kimberly. I'm waiting for your presentation because the title is very catchy and it's very interesting. More fixing the pipeline, less fixing the woman. It's very, very interesting. I read the abstract and I read a lot about your resume. It is very interesting. You have a lot of work, and you have a National Association of Female Executive, the National Latin Business Women Association. You have a lot of academic journal, and you present frequently at the professional and academic conferences. So I don't want to. I will give the reader, the audience, to hear more about from you about how we can fix the pipeline without fixing the woman. So this is your speech. Please, you can start.
Well, thank you so much. And again, I'm grateful to be here and pretty humbled by the unbelievable insight and expertise of the other women presenting here today. It's just been awesome to be a part of and to hear and to learn from and to just see how much overlap there is between, you had said, whether it's Egypt, whether it's Brazil, the United States, so much of what we're hearing rings true on a global level. And it's just really nice to come together to kind of talk about that and realize that that we're kind of experiencing things a little bit differently where we're from, but a lot of the same experiences, lived experiences for women are happening on a global level. So I am going to ask if you are able, let me see. No, let me try it this way. Let me do something a little different here. Since I already have my PowerPoint right here, I'm going to, okay, let's do this. Share. And then we will go like this. And I will move this so that I can do it as a, are we, there we go. Does that look like a full screen?
Yes, it
for
does.
everyone? Okay, perfect. So the title is really indicative of a lot of the focus of my work. I look a lot at the kind of what I call broken pipeline, which is that women tend to have made a lot of headway into the middle leadership, mid-management type of situation. But then there's this kind of break off, right? The pyramid type of shape where you start to see fewer and fewer and fewer women as you get higher and higher up in those positions of pay, prestige, power, and influence. So that is what we're going to talk about today. So obviously, despite increasing recognition, well supported in the research of the benefits of women and gender diversity in organizations, notwithstanding all of the growing initiatives implemented to support the advancement of women, the lack of women at the highest levels of leadership still remains across domains, from education to government to healthcare to business to the STEM fields, underrepresented in most countries across the globe. And we heard from all of those different domains today. There's still that lack of equity. And so, I included some statistics here from the United Nations Women's Research, and you can see how women's serving as presidents or prime ministers or heads of government in very few countries still globally. 119 countries have never had a woman leader. Just 10 countries have had a head of state. I live in the United States, a country which has never had a woman president, but now has a woman vice president. Executive officers globally. I mean, this is the kind of change we keep talking about. If you go back a decade at the Fortune 500 S&P, maybe you have 5% of women as CEOs. And then after all of these initiatives and all of these discussions, we still see that it's still pretty abysmal, the numbers in terms of the numbers of women in now those top positions. And the higher up the ladder we go, obviously the fewer women we see, but particularly in those roles that lead to CEO top leadership. So men tend to be concentrated in those areas that are the ladder towards that top level position, where women tend to sometimes be in more administrative type of roles that don't naturally promote them into those particular types of areas. And this is my, they say a picture's worth 1,000 words. Well, this is a picture of what that might look like on a global level in terms of leadership. I can say a lot, but I think when you look at it like this, it really shows it in a poignant and meaningful way. This is kind of what the pyramid looks like in practice. So when I talk about fixing the women versus, or fixing the pipeline versus fixing the women, I'm really talking about the narratives that are surrounding women leaders, persistently reflecting widely circulated gender norms, limiting beliefs, and false assumptions. And these are all words I've heard throughout the whole day from other panelists as well. I have a quote from Miss Prime Minister, Gender, Media, and Leadership. The stories told about women leaders by the news media reflect widely circulated gender norms and assumptions. So, of course, what's happened is we've problematized women in the literature. How do we fix the problem of women in leadership, as opposed to seeing it as an opportunity and appreciating the value and all of the positives that come with it? It's been problematized. And you constantly see both in the literature, in media news stories, in books, in within the actual organizations that bring in gender diversity initiatives. It's this kind of, well, how do we help women fix the things that are holding them back? Right. So you hear, they don't have the type of experience. They need to do this to have more experience. They lack assertiveness. They lack decisiveness. They can't balance work and motherhood. And we've heard a lot about that today. A lot about lacking the desire for power, opting out. Women are choosing to be home with their families, and even well-educated women, and they don't know how to negotiate. And so these are the types of stories that really have gained a lot of traction in the media. A lot of programming has been developed around the idea that women are broken, that we need to be fixed, and that if we could fix women and get them to where they need to be, then of course they could fix the problem for themselves, which is also very interesting, because what you're really saying is that women must fix their problem. And I'm all for empowerment. We are, of course, part of the solution. But when you blame women for our own oppression and then call it empowerment, that is frustrating. When you say, well, it's right there for you to grab, all you have to do is grab it, and all you have to do is want it enough, and all you have to do is educate, coach, mentor, sponsor. We hear that all the time: get a sponsor, and those are important things, and I'm not discounting the importance of them. However, they fail to really address some of the structural, cultural, social, organizational structures that really serve to keep women from advancing and that hinder women's advancement and growth. And I think we've heard other presenters talk about that a lot today. This is positioned as an individual problem for women, when this is really a larger societal issue and a larger structural issue that has deeply entrenched roots in terms of things that keep us from benefiting and advancing. As I said, these narratives, this constant storyline that we hear, it can almost be brainwashing. That's why it's so important, and others have said this, to have these conversations that we're having today, to say we're changing the narrative. And a lot of people say, well, action is most important, and it is, but you drive action with education and understanding and mindset shifts, and shifting the mindset from the problem of women and needing to fix women to understanding the full complexity of issue, the well-entrenched social, cultural, political, organizational, and barriers that women encounter every day in every domain on a global level. These are things we need to be talking about and addressing and be mindful of. So we have to kind of shift the conversation from fixing the women to fixing the pipeline. Shift from problematizing this as a gender issue. Well, because women want advancement, we now have to do all of these things. No, 21st century that we live in has women and men both working in equal measure. And yet the childcare, the flexibility, some of the things that are necessary for men and women to both work in unison and successfully aren't existing. And people have talked about, the kind of second shift that women have in terms of, the responsibilities and those social cultural norms, the biases of what the ideal woman is versus the ideal man. Man is kind of the breadwinner, the one who's out there slaying the dragons and making the money, and the woman is the one who's being the caregiver. Those persist despite significant shifts in the actual statistics of women in the workforce and so forth. So we have to start thinking about the workforce, leadership, all domains from the perspective of, in a 21st century, with women and men all working and wanting advancement and a seat at the table in leadership, what are the policies and programs and structures that need to be in place for that to happen? And those structures need to have a consideration of the professional, political, cultural, and personal realities of women and men in 21st century workforce. So let's talk a little bit about that. There's all kinds of research on this. There's a lot of science to support gendered power relations in organizations and in organizational structures, built-in components that preserve the existing power structure, that preserve the status quo. A male competitive model that says the way it's always been done is the way it always should be done. That ties in androcentrism, right? The idea that the male or the masculine point of view is the center of all of it. So those women who want to advance need to adapt to the existing structure. And there was a time when the workforce was mostly men, and we designed structures for that workforce, and that has shifted, but we still want to kind of maintain in some ways those same structures that worked in an environment that is no longer existing. So you have the male competitive model, you have gender socialization, which is the idea that there's certain ways that that men should behave and certain ways women should behave. And that might mean leadership, and that might mean negotiation, and that's tone, and that's the way we present things. Women, what is considered decisive for a man may be considered aggressive for a woman. And so all of these kind of gendered socialized constructs are there that get in the way. Casuistic biases, which are kind of moving the needle a little bit, moving what needs to happen. So if it's a man, then his educational background is more important. But then when a woman has the higher level of education, all of a sudden the male experience is more important. So shifting kind of discussions of that which is essential to the role, and ultimately that which is essential is that which is male, and that can move, and just the good old boys club, right? Women, if you want to be in it, then work harder to get here, as opposed to saying, why is that a club that I have to join? Why don't we create a club from scratch for all of us? So you've got that, agentic leadership norms, as I said, what ways that, men can behave that are respected and valued, but when women do it, it's kind of that tightrope, walking a tightrope where you're trying to balance between being liked and being seen as effective and capable. And so, these kind of exhausting, the emotional labor and exhaustion of trying to keep up with the unwritten rule book that exists, the think leader, think male, men as natural leaders, all of these types of things that we're up against. And then the privileges that exist, the unwarranted meritocracy mindset, this idea that we keep pushing that, everyone who works hard has the same opportunities. I mean, I think it's a wonderful message to a degree, but it's limiting. If we seriously believe that everyone is equally able to get to the top, then we're really saying, well, I don't know why you're not at the top, women. We all have the same opportunities. You must be in some way defective or less than. And so I think we know that that's not true. And a lot of that is that there's a lot of things. I mean, men can look around and see other men throughout their entire careers advancing. They have those models. Men, the research shows that there's a prove it again bias where women have to prove themselves over and over and over again, where men don't have to. They can make more mistakes without the consequences being as consequential. They can be seen for potential versus what they have to prove. And then, again, these are all things that not only exhaust women, but that even when women work hard to advance with these structures in place, it still doesn't work. And so we're given all this advice. If you just learn to negotiate, if you take the class to mentor, if you do all these things, then you'll see the reward. And then a decade goes by and we look at the outcomes and the measurement, and the rewards aren't there. And women are kind of left not only scratching their head and saying, wow, what happened here? I did all the things. I did everything that was asked, but also then having to have that self-imposed blame. This kind of narrative that says, well, you had every opportunity. Look at all of the opportunities and the programs and the diversity initiatives that were put into place. I don't know what to tell you. You need to carry that weight on your shoulders. And so that also creates a little bit of a difficult situation for women to overcome. And I think a large part of this is the scarcity narrative that exists. And what I mean is you look at abundance, the state of feeling plentiful, and scarcity, the state of not having enough. If we look at the power, and there's always this kind of, well, if women advantage, men disadvantage, right? It's positioned as this win-lose, or like men need to let go of, give up their power so women can have some. So there's this idea of scarcity that with one person gaining, the other loses. And so much of this conversation needs to be shifted to a conversation of abundance. There is plenty for all. There is plenty of room for success at the top for men and women. Men don't have to give up the success and opportunities at the top for women to be a part of it. Organizations don't have to as well. So we have to kind of shift that mindset from a scarcity mindset to an abundance mindset. I want to talk a little bit too about gender justice, because I think that there's been a lot of focus on quantifying women's position in leadership, saying, women should be promoted because it's simply good business. It's, an efficacy mindset. And that is very important. And certainly when you're talking about things like boards and where a lot of, the stock market and those types of things, where people are looking and saying, well, tell me why I should change, right? Because change is difficult and things seem to be working pretty well for some people the way they are. And why should I change? And there's always this argument of, women's leadership and political decision-making improves processes, more gender equitable organizations are more profitable, more successful, more creative, and that's important. But it also takes away from the important conversation and a huge part of what we're talking about here, which is gender justice and the dismantling, the societal focus and prioritization of dismantling harmful structures and constructs that result in discrimination and oppression. And gender justice is a human right. And so, yes, it's good business, but that doesn't mean it's also not important to talk about from a justice perspective. The United Nations noted 70 years ago, women's rights are fundamental human rights. The incremental changes that we've made have not moved the needle. Talking about how women can make the world better is important, but that we have to justify it ignores the gender justice point of it. We don't just belong in those positions because we're able to be successful in them. Men are in positions even when they fail sometimes. No one says, oh, that president was terrible, maybe we shouldn't have another male president, or, oh, wow, that CEO just did a terrible job, maybe we shouldn't have another male CEO. And that's that privilege we're talking about. So again, we need to keep gender justice and the ideals of discrimination and oppression also in the conversation, and they're critical. And because of the context of this whole conference, I want to talk a little bit about COVID-19. And Dr. Capelli, I was very interested in the kinds of things you were talking about in terms of, on a global level, the impact, because I don't know that we've had enough conversation necessarily about the impact that COVID is going to have and the long-term issues that are going to arise. And so, my PowerPoint is not shifting. So let me see if I can change that. Oh, there we go. Okay. So COVID-19 is threatening to erode the limited gains that have been made. And so we've worked so hard and tirelessly and at a level of exhaustion. And all of the sudden, wow, just like that, we've decided it's just not that important for women to be in the workforce. Essentially, like, we've got to keep people home. And that means women, you're going to have to be home with your children, because we've got a whole plan for keeping people at home, but we don't have any plan for what that means in terms of women working, or how the children are going to be cared for while they're at home with two working parents. And so the burden of care, as you had said, Dr. Capelli, is just hugely, and others have mentioned this in our moderator, is hugely significant for women. And that, of course, was exacerbated in this whole COVID-19 situation. And we really have to ensure that we don't retreat, okay, that we don't allow for that retreat in the labor markets, and that caregivers don't end up staying at home and being at home. So that really needs to be a top priority for us in a post-COVID-19 world. And so I want to talk about goals specifically because I hear a lot of better, right? Things have to get better or things are getting better. And that's so kind of random in general and unspecific when we say better, right? Like, what does that mean? Because 10 years ago, women were, under 10% of CEOs, and 10 years later, after a ton of initiatives, women are still underrepresented greatly and under 10% and so forth. So when, I want to talk about two very specific goals. One is recovery, short-term recovery. COVID-19 has driven millions of women out of the workforce, and we have to really put that at the top of the conversation. How do we get them back? How do we on-ramp them? What types of organizational, structural, and societal programs need to be in place? How can we learn from this in terms of what we need to be doing better from a childcare perspective, from a flexible work perspective, from a technological perspective? The broken pipeline is persisting. And now we've got another cog kind of blocking. We've got this whole COVID-19. So in the short term, we've got to be very focused on recovery with specificity of planning and addressing the issues from a realistic perspective. Swift action is needed to limit the duration and the damage economically that has happened from COVID-19. And then I think the second goal is normalization. I think when we say we want it to get better, people say, well, what do you mean? What I mean is, and what we mean is normalization, which means a phenomenon is no longer seen as extraordinary, exceptional, or unconventional. So when it is commonplace for women to be on boards, for women to be presidents and government leaders, for when we look at that picture that I showed earlier with 10 men and 1 woman, and sometimes there's 6 women and 5 men, and sometimes there's 6 and 6 or 5 and 6. That's what normalization means. We are nowhere near better until this is no longer extraordinary or unconventional, but commonplace. So that's what I have. And I'm very open to any comments, questions, or suggestions. Let me just stop.
I wish that you didn't stop because it is very inspiring.
I wish more people told me not to stop talking. That would be wonderful.
No, I wish that you didn't stop. Yes, very energetic and very clear and very precise. I really enjoy it truly because it is inspiring, very clear in mind. And I felt as well that we are in the same loop. We are turning around. And I wish that we are going to talk later in other conferences about something except gender inequality, and we want our equality, and we want our rights, and we want to fix the vibe, or we are going to leave them or leave the house and leave everything for all of you because we're the caregiver, because they are the bone of any family and any commitments. So yes, I'm very pleased to have all the speakers.
For me, education is the key for my future.